call control is, I think, both art and science. It's the art of making a customer feel like we're moving towards a resolution, but doing it quickly. But there's some real techniques behind that. And I'm joined today by Myra Golden, who is a certified master de-escalation instructor and a customer experience designer. She's also the author of a fantastic LinkedIn learning course on call control called Call Control Strategies. And so we're going to be talking today about exactly what is that art and science of call control. So Myra, before we jump into it, I don't know if everybody listening is really familiar with this technique. Would you mind explaining from a high level what exactly is call control?
Absolutely. I read that the average business call lasts 2 minutes longer than it needs to. And it usually goes on because a customer is upset or they're talkative. And they're talkative maybe because their questions haven't been answered, they're frustrated, or they need closure, need to know what's next. So, call control is the art of politely moving a call forward. And that can be a chat, it's moving a conversation forward to closure.
I like that definition a lot. Now, I wonder do you find that in today's contact center environment, is call control a big topic? Is it something that agents are trained on? Or is it perhaps something that's a forgotten skill?
I think it is a big topic based on the clients that I work with. Some, not a lot as it used to be. In the beginning, people were really focused on talk time. But now we are smarter. We want to have a conversation. We want to have a great customer experience. But even with a focus on a great customer experience, we don't want to have calls in queue longer than they need to be because we don't know how to control the conversation at hand. Now, a lot of people think it's a problem with de-escalation, and sometimes that's it. But they'll come to me either looking for how do we learn to de-escalate situations or how do we wrap a call faster. But I've been hearing about this topic for 20 years. The focus is no longer because we're trying to manage talk time. It's we want a great experience for the person in front of us and everybody waiting.
I think you're so right. I was running a contact center training department over 20 years ago, and call control was a huge topic. And you're right, it was about talk time. You bring up, I think, a very important point, which is there's elements of the call that are not benefiting the customer. I also see that customers aren't always the greatest at telling their story or explaining clearly what they need. And I'm wondering if it's some of that goes into that 2 minutes you were talking about, where you said that calls take longer than they need to. What else are you seeing that makes calls just go on longer than they really should?
Sometimes, a lot of the times, it's a customer. They don't know how to get to the point. They want to tell you the backstory, the journey of how they got there. But there are times when it is the customer service professional. Perhaps a customer opens up giving you their name, the gist of the issue. They give you that order number. And if we're not, taking notes quickly or typing as they talk, because it's hard to be able to listen and grasp everything, we might go back and have the customer repeat details they've already given us. I see that a lot. And then another big issue is we lose control, we being customer service professionals, when we don't proactively answer the customer's questions. And just to give you an example, I was working with a large utility and they would be vague with the next steps. And someone will get back to you, or we will reach out without giving you a definite time target or telling what department would reach out. So the customer's question would be, who will reach out to me? Will that be email? Will that be phone call? Is that within 24 hours? Is that within 5 business days? If we structure the conversation with someone from our review team will take a look at this and they will email you at the email address we have on file within 2 to 4 business days. If we answer the questions that we know are likely to be asked, then we can shave seconds off of talk time just in the closing. But if we begin to do that throughout the interaction, you're going to shorten the call. You're going to give the customer what they need, the answers and that assurance that you will follow up on whatever those next steps are.
I think you raised such an important issue, which is just being clear up front prevents all of those follow-up questions. I think for customers, it also maybe reduces some of the anxiety.
Right.
And I want to go back to something else you brought up a little bit earlier, which I think for some of our listeners perhaps might be counterintuitive. An upset customer is more resistant to ideas.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of contact center agents, the person's really upset and they're trying to mitigate their talk time. So they jump to the conclusion, they're offering the solution. And it's like we get this friction, right? Where the customer, so if we're using call control and we're not just pushing through the customer's emotions to get to the solution, like what does that actually look like when you have an upset customer, an angry customer?
You know, I love that you brought that up and asked that specific question. You know, when a person is upset, they are very often in the right side of the brain. And so that's our emotional side. This is where we are when we tell stories or we're listening to music or we dance or do artwork. And so obviously it's a productive side of the brain, but it's also where we experience every emotion. So that's joy, surprise, love, anger, frustration. And when we don't make the customer feel heard and understood, they stay in the right side of the brain. But we need them on the left side where they are rational, where, you know, this is where we are when we are working a math problem or we are doing something, science. We need them to be there, or whole brain is even better. And the way we make them shift or help them, we don't make them, we help them shift, is by linking what psychologists call the communication chain. And essentially how that works is if I were delivering a live workshop with an audience in front of me, and let's say I started out with, "Good afternoon." And any speaker who's ever done that has probably been met with a little awkwardness. But let's say I started with, "Good afternoon," and the room is dead silent. How do you think I might feel? I mean, you're a fellow professional training. How would I feel if I said good afternoon and the room is silent?
There's always that moment of awkwardness, isn't there? When they're staring at you like, yeah, okay, let's get on with it.
Right. That's exactly it. And then everybody in the room has heard and felt that awkwardness with you. And that is because the audience didn't link the communication chain by responding. And they can respond with good afternoon or hey or a smile or something. When there is a response, the communication chain is linked. But if there is no response, it's unlinked or broken if there was a link to begin with. And upset customers behave that way. If we fail to link the communication chain when they are upset or when they have questions that we're not answering, or we're going in a direction, you know, we want to know claim number and last four of social security number and, you know, method of payment. They don't want that. They want to be able to tell that story first. What we do if we go in a different direction is we either unlink the chain or just break it if we had the link in the first place. That sends a customer to the right side of the brain. They become actually more talkative. We think we're controlling the conversation by asking for details, but we're sending them to the right brain and they are going to be heard. That might be interrupting you, over talking you, demanding to talk to a manager. So we have to acknowledge by saying something like, "I realize how frustrating this is," or "I can see your point on that," before you go into the questions.
I wonder how hard that is to do with so many rigid procedures. You know, verify these 27 different items before you even talk to the customer about their issue. It's almost like we're putting them on the defensive. Oh, by the way, we made you listen to endless terrible hold music for 10 minutes and punch a bunch of different numbers into the system that we're not even going to recognize. And now we'll talk to you. Are there things like that contact centers can be doing to make call control easier for their agents? For example, how much upfront verification should they be doing versus listening at the beginning of the call?
When I was a call center manager over 20 years ago, I made the mistake of having the system, so the applications that my employees use required, and I didn't know this in the beginning, and this is, hindsight is 2020, but my agents had to ask 7 questions. I mean, so that's, it's rental agreement number, name, location number, method of payment, dates of rental. We were in car rental. So they had 7 questions that they had to ask before they could get to the problem. And customers, that's not how they operate. They don't want to fill in your blanks. And what I learned is through listening to recorded calls in my own contact center is it didn't sound like a dialogue. It was not a conversation. What the transaction sounded like it was transactional, and it felt like an interview. And if the tone was wrong, it sounded like an interrogation, designed to trick the customer or set the customer up. And I had been managing for years before I realized my mistake. And so we were not controlling calls because customers would go to the right side of the brain. They were upset. We had a tremendous amount of escalations. And this was a small contact center, and we only had one supervisor. So I, the manager, a supervisor who handled all of the escalations. And so she was nearly pulling her hair out because that's all she did was call back. So what I realized, and what I now share with my clients, is we have to start with the system. And so we actually had to invest in a new CRM system that allowed our agents to free form. So if the customer started out with their story, you can jump right to notes and begin to type as they talk. And then when it's a good place for you to interject, then you can come in with, may I have the last 4 digits of your social security number or the email address you use? So we had to redesign our system to allow the agents to follow the customer's journey rather than making the customer fill in our blanks. When we did that, we improved customer satisfaction by each interaction. Our talk time was shaved by several seconds. I don't remember the details at this point. And we had fewer escalations. And so I didn't expect all of that. I really thought we'll just have a friendlier, warmer, more natural customer experience. But the benefit was fewer escalations and shorter talk time. So I think start with systems. Look at the system. Can agents move around as a customer flows, or do they have to say, nope, I've got to answer question number 1, and then we'll go to 2, then we'll go to 3. If that is the case, you may sound rote and you're adding more minutes onto your talk time than you need.
I think that's such a wonderful suggestion because on one hand, I can imagine people listening saying, wait a minute, this call has to be linear. That's how we train it. That's how the system works. That's how the QA form is set up. And I think your example of listening to calls and asking yourself, is this a conversation or an interrogation? I think most of us would say we're going for conversation. We would prefer conversation. Maybe some companies it's different, but
most of us,
most of us, we're going for that conversation. Yeah. Are there specific things that you can share in terms of techniques that agents can use within that conversation to make the customer feel great, but still keep things on track?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of it is our techniques. So if we lose control, it's okay. We can begin to rein the customer back in by doing, several things. For example, if I'm talking to a friendly customer who's not upset, but they're just talkative, I can offer a minimal response to keep that conversation friendly, but within my control. So for example, I live in Oklahoma. And during tornado season, you would be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but how many people ask about the weather? They want to talk about the tornadoes or what they saw in the news. And so, I could talk 20 minutes about that, but I don't always have the leisure of time. And so you can give a minimal response like, yeah, we did have tornadoes in the area last night, and fortunately the damage was minimal, and just leave it there. Or if someone says, well, how are you today? You might say, rather than going into detail on how you are, I'm well. How nice of you to ask. How may I help you? So you give a minimal response, flip it right into what's productive, and you're friendly, because you don't want to ever make a customer feel cut off. They feel that. And so if they ask how you are, you do need to answer that. I'm great, thanks. What can I do for you today? So that's one of the easiest ways, I think, to rein the customer in a polite way. One of my favorite techniques, and it requires a little planning, is the ask 3 closed-ended questions back to back. And I didn't come up with this. Many years ago, I hired a consultant, Sally Cox. She was based in Tulsa at the time. I brought her into my contact center when we were struggling with call control. So it was an overhaul. So the system, the new CRM system was one big piece of that, but I wanted the soft skills. And she came in and she taught my agents to ask customers at the moment that you feel you've lost control, ask customers 3 closed-ended questions back to back. And so as an example, open-ended is, what's your favorite food? Closed-ended, do you like pizza? And so we wanted to focus on the closed-ended. And so if we lost control because a person is, they're frustrated because this is their 3rd call. And so they've got to vent about, how long it's taken to get this resolved, or they need you to hear their story. And that story is a full 7 minutes. Sally taught my agents to start with 3 questions that can be answered with 1 word or a series of numbers, questions that are relevant to solving the problem. So you don't just pull questions out of the air. They do need to be relevant. And so my group, working with Sally, came up with, and again, this is going back to car rental, so I can remember specific examples. She had my agents ask questions such as, can you give me your rental agreement number? And you can find that in the top right-hand corner of your invoice. And so it's a number, and no one had it memorized because it's like 2 letters and like 13 or so numbers. And so they'd have to stop talking, look down at that invoice to retrieve that number. And then we would ask, what is your location code? And some people would know, okay, that's PHX for Phoenix, but they still had to go to the left brain to recall that. And then we might ask, can you give the exact dates of rental? Most people would have to stop and look that up, or at least you're pulling it from your left brain. Sally taught us that when you ask 3 closed-ended questions back to back, you have the customer shift from the emotional right side of the brain to the logical, rational left side, where they have to listen, they have to stop, they have to process things before they move forward. And I'll tell you, this worked like a magic wand with our customers. So at the point that you've lost control, you pull out those 3 questions that you've already prepared, because situations are not that different from interaction to interaction, and it puts you back in control. So that is my favorite technique. It does take some pre-planning, but it works.
I like that technique a lot, because there's a technique that I've often used and have shared. It's just called the acknowledge and refocus, where you acknowledge someone's feelings. And wow, it must be a really frustrating situation. You refocus on the problem, but I think the 3 closed-ended questions gives a very concrete place to go. And it also signals to the customer, hey, I'm here to help you. Wow, I'm so sorry you had that experience. Let's get you through this. If we can, let's start with that rental agreement number. I like that, because it positions yourself as someone who's helpful, but then you're also kind of derailing the crazy train, if you will, or the customer's kind of dragging their emotional baggage. They get snapped into, okay, now we're part of this. We're working together. We're a team now.
I like actually my 3 questions back to back with your acknowledgement and refocus, because you don't want to sound, so focused on the problem.
Right.
Yours adds empathy and a human tone, and you combine those. And I talk a lot in my programs about acknowledging concern. So I think we're on the same page there, but you combine those 2 techniques, you've got a great customer experience and you're in control. You don't get better than that.
It's the yes and. I like that. Yeah. So I think we have time for one more question. And I don't know if anybody else listening has this question. This one's for me. I have a challenge when I'm speaking with someone on the phone or even in person, and they're going on and on and on. And I find myself subconsciously giving them a signal to continue. So they'll go on and on. I'll go, oh, really? I'm telling them, tell me more. And the back of my mind's like, why did you do that? Are there ways to kind of stop giving those signals, but still be polite, like the subconscious signal, the one you didn't intend to submit, but
Oh,
it's going.
yeah. In fact, I was the customer yesterday in an interaction, complaining about a contractor, and the lady on the phone did exactly what you're describing. And to when I was telling her the real story, she was saying things like "Wow" or "I can't believe that," and that was because she had so much empathy and connection that it was very easy for her to go into phrases like that. But the de-escalation professional in me thought what she's doing is opening the door. What I would say to that is, I love that any person who does that, I love that you're real and you're genuine and you share how you're feeling because those reactions are authentic. If, however, you feel that those reactions are, adding seconds, if not minutes to the call, just try to be aware of that. And you may have to just catch yourself. You just, oh, I did it again. And then just try next time instead of, or tell me more is what you're saying when you say, oh, wow, or, uh-huh. You might say, I can see your point on that. Let me ask you this, or let's do this. So if you can tag on a phrase or a comment that moves the interaction forward, then you're okay. So, well, here's what I think we need to do next is a great segue after you've opened the door.
I think you've given me a very nice homework assignment, and I appreciate the tip. Anybody watching, I highly recommend Myra's course. It's fantastic. It's so well done. Other than LinkedIn Learning, they need to check out that course and some of your other ones, which are also very good. How can people find you if they want to learn more about you and track down some of your content?
The best way to find me would be to go to myragolden.com. That's my website and a blog. And on my blog, I have dozens of resources to help you control calls, whether that is an angry customer or just one who is frustrated or talkative. Sometimes they're not upset, but they are talkative. So I have dozens of resources, including videos and phrases and takeaway steps and techniques. And you can always connect with me on linkedin.com, Myra Golden. I share several techniques throughout the week: on-call control and also de-escalation, which can often, if we don't handle it right, can let things spiral out of control.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Myra, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I learned a lot.
Well, thank you for having me.